Judgment Days. The verdict on the case of Shetpe disorders is announced in Aktau. School of Protest. The growing pains of Kazakhstan's trade unions as a symbol of the growing protest moods of the population. Edification Report. The head of state posed as a global thinker of our time at the Economic Forum in Astana. You're watching Vlast KZ on K+. We review all the key trends, highlights, and personalities of the past week. My name is Asilbek Abdulov. Good day. New court verdicts were announced at the trials in Aktau. The ruling over the case of mass disorders at the Shetpe train station in the Mangistau region, which occurred on December 17, 2011, leaves many questioning the fairness of the decision. 12 Shetpe residents served as defendants in the case. One was acquitted by the court due to the lack of evidence. 6 were sentenced to 2 years imprisonment, but they were pardoned and released inside the courtroom. Based on the ruling, the entire burden of events at the Shetpe station fell on the shoulders of 5 men. Kazhamurat Avezov was sentenced to 7 years in a maximum security prison. Yerzhan Mambetov and Bakirjan Gabidyan received 5-year sentences each, while Nurbalat Sabirbayev got a 4-year term. Defendant Qasym Yermakhanoglu was sentenced to 3 years probation. Thus, the barely emerging trend for humanization of sentences, with 1 acquitted and 6 pardoned defendants, was immediately crushed and suppressed by the judicial machine, which announced harsh sentences for the other defendants. During the days of the December tragedy, no one in Kazakhstan except for Shetpe residents entered the streets to protest against the massacre of people in Zhanaozen. Taking into account the aggravating facts as well as the recurrence of committed crimes, convicted Avezov was found guilty and sentenced to 7 years in a maximum security prison, according to Article 13, Section 2, Paragraph 6 of the Criminal Code. This is the end of the trial on the riots at the Shetpe station on December 17, 2011. Out of 12 defendants, 1 was acquitted, 6 sentenced to 2 years, but pardoned in the courtroom, and the remaining men, Bakirjan Mambetov, Sabirbayev Avezov, and Yermakhanoglu, were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 3 to 7 years. The audience in the courtroom spoke of major injustice of the decision. There was also no joy on the faces of pardoned defendants. There is no justice. These men were unlawfully convicted. Instead of being pardoned, it would have been better just to convict me. What can I say? There is no justice. I think they're brave heroes. They should be awarded and not tried in court. Those 4 guys have to be released. We are not going to leave it this way. The whole nation is worried for them, and it will rise for them, just like residents of Shetpe who stood up for Zhanaozen. Who else was there? Only residents of Shetpe. They are true heroes who will remain in history. All newspapers and TV channels lied about 14 killed because people from Zhanaozen were telling that they were slaughtered like sheep and over 100 people were killed, but not 14. Family members of the 36-year-old Gabidyan Bakirjan, who was sentenced to 5 years, believe that the court had no evidence of his guilt. Moreover, the judge did not consider that Gabidyan has the second group disability and 5 small children. The oldest one is 14, and the youngest is just 2 years old. There is not a single video evidence in which my son appears urging others for violence, ordering anyone to bring posters or Molotov cocktails. He does not gather people for rallies. He did not give out orders to anyone to bring weapons or gasoline. I asked the investigators to show me one such video, and if I'll see him there, then I will be convinced in my son's guilt, but there is no evidence. Attorney Berali Seitmakanbet believes that policemen should be blamed for the riots in Shetpe. He said that during the trial, he carefully watched the video in which the police actually provoked the crowd. The attorney intends to file an appeal to the regional court. The court found no evidence, therefore I think it was necessary to release these people. These 4 were sentenced because there had to be some scapegoats. Bakirjan Mambetov and Sabirbayev were caught on the video when they were protesting. Based on this evidence and with the help of fake witnesses, these 3 and also Avezov, who has a prior conviction, were marked for severe punishments. There were 10 pages of video transcript in which you cannot find a single word about these men. On the contrary, there are words of police officers who have directly approached the protesters and said, "We will severely punish you." In his speech to young readers, poet and writer Mirzan Kinjabai talks about humanity. He says that after the tragedy in the Mangistau region, it became important to talk about people's indifference towards each other. Kazakhstan is fighting against corruption, but it also needs to start fighting against the justice system. If someone will say that the courts in Kazakhstan deliver fair justice, then this man is either sick or stupid. In the case of Shetpe, the decision was not made by a judge, but by the president's administration. Serik Yelikbay, the author of the first novel about the Janauzian tragedy, Kök Kolgan Kun, initiated the creation of the Independent Writers Union. He believes such an organization should not be pro-opposition or pro-government, but instead express the aspirations of the people. According to Yelikbay, the current Writers Union became a union of sycophants. People are not asking the cultural elite to protest on the streets. They are not asking them to pick up rocks and arms and go to the square. Their job is to write about what happened in Janauzian and fill out the newspaper pages. The authorities now want to close the topic of the Mangistau tragedy, and intellectuals should incessantly talk about it. On the opposite, many also avoid this topic. I personally do not worry as much about the court's decisions and fatalities as for the fact that no one can stand up for them. This is footage of riots in Shetpe on December 17, 2011, when people blocked railroad tracks, demanded to withdraw troops from Janauzian, and stop the violence. Local authorities responded to these demands with bullets. Later, Shetpe residents showed the shells and traces of blood to reporters. There was still hope that prosecutors will punish those responsible for opening fire at civilians. After 5 months of arrest, the 20-year-old Asan Adiyev is welcomed home only by a younger sister. His mother is seriously ill, so she was not told where her son was. I do not know why I was accused. I was on my way back to work at 6 a.m. when I was arrested, and no one was looking for me. As you can see, my mother is blind and my sister is just a kid. When I was in jail, no one knew where I was. I was beaten there. I lost my health. It can be said that Asan is lucky. He's one of the 6 defendants who were pardoned and released from custody in the courtroom. Before his arrest, Asan worked as a coach. He is the only breadwinner in this old ramshackle house. Now, by court order, Asan and other pardoned defendants have to pay damage compensations. Among the receivers is the Kazakhstan Railroad Company, which estimated that the upheaval resulted in a loss of $108,000. During the Janauzian events, a small village of Shetpe was the only settlement which stood out in defense of oil workers. Local residents are not going to give up even now, after the end of the trial. We were planning to get permission for a rally before the court verdict was announced. Then we thought that it would cause an opposite reaction. Later we decided that we will protest after the end of the trial. If we will not be allowed to hold a rally, we will gather the people at the club. We will speak out of what we think. Everyone agreed on this for now. The announcement of the verdict over the case of 37 oil workers is protracted by the court. On May 15th, Judge Nagashbayev completed his investigation and adjourned the hearing without naming the date when he will announce the final ruling. The prosecution requested up to 9 years in prison for the defendants. The presentation of cases ended at the trial over policemen who opened fire at civilians, but the judge left the date of the verdict announcement a mystery. At this point, we have 2 completed trials with announced verdicts. On the case of 12 Shetpe residents and Janauzian temporary detention facility chief Jenizbek Demirov, who was sentenced to 5 years with confiscation of property. A new trial started in Aktau during this past week. The defendant is the former mayor of the town, Orak Sarbopeyev. He is charged with embezzlement of finances allocated through public funds for the social needs of oil workers in the amount of over $1 million. The participation of jurors in the trial was a novelty. Judge Rinat Dasmabetov picked 12 people out of 64 candidates, and a dozen will announce their sentence for Orak Sarbopeyev based on the results of a judicial investigation. According to the official version, the former mayor's theft contributed to the rise of social tension and led to the strike of oil workers in Janauzian. The trial will possibly bring to justice some representatives of local authorities. As part of continuous drama to fully expose the Janauzian tragedy, the role of officials in the Mangistau events, their actions and omissions are supposed to solve another puzzle in the overall picture of the December violence. The protest moods of workers are shifting from the oil-rich west of the country to its mining center. In May, the employees of the Aninsk mine, belonging to Kazakhmys Corporation, went on strike and achieved higher wages. In Temirtau, metallurgists and miners of ArcelorMittal held a similar sanctioned rally.
Instead of long-awaited 7% indexation, I suggest to let them add 1% to us each month. This way we'll receive all 7% before the end of this year. I hasten to laugh for fear of having to cry. That's how the workers of the industrial giant comment on the result of talks between trade union and employers. They tend to save money on everything. The lack of staff have doubled or tripled the workload for each employee. However, despite all emotional speeches, this meeting have raised more questions than answers. It featured well-printed posters with slogans like "Employer is known for paying the salary," organizers calling everyone to stay alert and prevent political provocations, while speeches were read off paper. We, the participants of ArcelorMittal Temirtau Workers' Rally, support the demands of the labor union of miners and metallurgists for higher wages. The labor dispute of ArcelorMittal reminds of a protracted ping-pong match, although the employer and the trade union use all sorts of resolutions instead of a ball, says Pavel Shumkin, a well-known miners' rights activist in Karaganda. First, it is rather an imitation of talks and the trade union activities to pacify the workers. This isn't anything new. It's like a fixed fight. It's hard to call it a real struggle for the rights. However, the destiny of real people is behind the vigorous speeches of trade union officials and the neat posters. Stepan Danshin became disabled and he is not even in his 30s. The employer qualified his industrial foot injury as off-the-job one. Stepan appealed to the court to defend his rights. The mine seems to be a separate state. It has its own laws and regulations. Stepan Danshin has been engaged in litigation for already 3 years. During this time, the company covered the sick leave and paid for the former miner about $170 for the call as disabled worker. The trade union formally replied that this was a sudden health impairment. The union fully and unequivocally sided with the employer. As far as I know, the authorities don't allow for independent trade unions development, since they imply a serious threat to the authorities. Ержан Amirkhanov, the shaft miner, became disappointed in the trade union committee and stopped paying his fees. He says he doesn't believe that working conditions will be improved and wages increased through talks between the employer and trade union committee. Ержан earns about $810 a month. This includes the hazardous duty pay. Those 5 or 10 workers who have achieved the 1.3 pay rate increase are our people. They were shifted to another location and other mines in order to take us apart. I personally addressed the petition saying I refuse to pay the trade union fees because I don't see their efficiency. The union protects the interests of the administration. Amirkhanov lives in Shakhtinsk in a small house built in the 60s with his wife and 2 daughters. The miner, who is not used to complaining, asks the reporters to see for themselves how hard it is to survive here. The head of miners' family, Natalia Tamilova, who knows all the problems of ArcelorMittal from the inside, says the main disadvantage of Arcelor trade union is that it doesn't know how to make demands. The demand for higher wages could be easily refused by the employer, and neither the government nor international organizations are capable or legally authorizing to dictate the employer how much to pay his employees. The employer is fully aware of it. That's why he's manipulating the situation. It might decide to throw employees on bone, whether it is 7% or 10%, and then call it a deal. According to Tamilova, the union should demand to improve working conditions, equipment upgrades, and compliance with safety regulations from ArcelorMittal. A person should make a risk assessment he is subjected to. If he agrees to work in such conditions, then they need to pay him the salary he requires. If they don't go for such pay, then the person shouldn't agree to work in this terrible environment. Now, if the union really wanted to achieve something, that's the first thing they should have done. 3,000 workers were expected to come to the strike declared by Arcelor trade union, yet only half of them showed up. The miners no longer believe the union. They stick to the idea that if you don't help yourself, no one else will.
Next on Vlast KZ. School of Protest. The growing pains of Kazakhstan's trade unions as a symbol of the growing protest moods of the population. Edification report. The head of state posed as a global thinker of our time at the Economic Forum in Astana. We will return with more after a short break.
Vlast KZ.
Главные события в Казахстане. Достоверные факты. Эксклюзивные комментарии. Читайте в Казахстане информационно-аналитический портал «Республика». Чтобы обойти блокировки, воспользуйтесь доменом respublicas.info. Вы окажетесь на так называемом прокси-портале. Специально разработанные канадскими специалистами по интернет-технологиям, прокси-порталы помогают пользователям получать информацию в тех странах, где блокируют интернет-ресурсы. В Китае, Иране, в Казахстане. Вы принимаете условия использования системы и попадаете на страницу информационно-аналитического портала «Республика». Материалы интернет-портала также доступны пользователям всемирной сети Facebook facebook.com/respublica.kaz. Если вы хотите поделиться информацией, вам есть что рассказать, звоните в редакцию «Республики». Наши телефоны в Казахстане +7 727 273 92 95, в Москве +7 495 621 87 03.
Новости Казахстана на казахском языке смотрите в 21:00 и далее каждый нечетный час. Новости Казахстана на русском языке в 22:00 и далее каждый четный час. Новости Казахстана на английском языке смотрите в 16:30, 17:30, 18:30 и 19:30 со вторника по субботу. Время Астаны. Изготовление и размещение рекламы на канале KplusTV.
Рост протестных настроений рабочего класса.
The growth of protest moods of the working class actualized the problems and contradictions of the trade union movement in Kazakhstan. Only small groups of independent labor unions are on the move and rush to help the workers. Their activity and assistance stands in contrast to the inaction of the idle Federation of Labor Unions of Kazakhstan, the direct successor of the Soviet-style labor unions.
Прямой наследницы советского ВЦСПС.
There was a time when Vladimir Lenin called trade unions the school of communism. In the post-Soviet era, official labor unions are ironically called the school of conformism. The followers and advocates of pure-form labor union ideology believe that present unions must be turned into a protest school.
В данный момент профсоюзы прежде всего должны стать школой протеста.
A group of Zhezkazgan heating plant employees appealed to the Anyansk Mine Trade Union. The activists are hoping that the union, which recently went on a successful strike, will help them solve their salary concerns. Their own union is dependent on the plant leadership and, to put it mildly, ignores the initiative. The union head has to defend workers' interests, but he's bowing to the administration and does what he is told to, even though he has to help us, the workers. Instead, he chases us out of his office like dogs and offends us. The miners called him the day before yesterday and told him the pressure group came to us instead of him. He cursed them off. Why do we need this kind of trade union? We need to re-elect our union head. An idle union committee is better for the company than an active one, says Vice President of Confederation of Free Trade Unions, Larisa Kharkova. She believes that the events in Zhanaozen and the example of Kazakhmys miners who won a 100% pay rise gave hope to many workers. Employees of the Shymkent factory of Neftorg Synthos, where Lyudmila is the union committee head, also asked for a pay rise.
Но после Zhanaozen, можно сказать, немножко изменилось положение.
You can say that things changed slightly after Zhanaozen. Committees were set up under Samruk Kazana and Shukeyev created superstructures. But I believe we don't need it that much now. We need the employers to recognize that not all is well in their enterprises. If workers raise questions, they need to be addressed immediately instead of waiting for them to burrow inside the mines and wait there. The issue in Kazakhmys wasn't resolved because of the lie-ins, but because it was a game played by certain people. That's why it was solved so quickly, and no one can say what will happen next.
И поэтому, естественно, работодатель тоже принимает определенное решение.
After the Zhanaozen stimulus and the chain reaction of protest actions, a whole series of official conferences and roundtables sprang up on the subject of trade unions. At one of them, the Secretary General of the Confederation of Trade Unions of Kazakhstan, Murat Mashkenov, who hasn't visited any of the recent strikes, put forward his own doctrine. In his opinion, the problem lies within the triplicity of the trade union system. Mashkenov offers to merge the Trade Union Federation, Trade Confederation and Confederation of Free Trade Unions into one big organization and spice it up with almost non-existent in Kazakhstan independent trade unions. We aren't just talking about primary organizations, and it isn't about dissolution as such. These organizations will continue operating in large enterprises for the time being. It is about centralization. We need to gradually move away from the value of the primary organization factor and towards regional trade unions.
Региональный, у нас есть такие прецеденты, региональные профсоюзы.
Все эти предложения, это просто, извиняюсь, детский сад. Это не в обиду вам будет сказано, это просто попытка.
All these suggestions are juvenile, but don't take it the wrong way. These proposals are nothing more than an attempt to align trade unions within the current system where employees intimidate the unions. This idea correlates with the old trade unions of Mukashev's time, but not with the more or less independent unions. But now they are currying favor with Murat because they were hit with bad times and something needs to be done.
С более-менее самостоятельными, а сейчас пытается заигрывать.
The fact that suspended trade disputes will come back to haunt you time and again is proven by polls. The analyst at the Institute for Political Decisions, Alisher Dastenov, published his work, which shows that the highest level of protest sentiments is registered in central Kazakhstan, in the Karaganda region. There, 66.7% of workers are ready to fight for their rights. 50% of the workers in West Kazakhstan's Mangistau region share the attitude, while in the two biggest megapolises of Almaty and Astana, the numbers are 42.5% and 46.6% respectively. The average tension temperature across the country is 37.6, just like in a virus infection.
Большая часть трудовых конфликтов, как правило, носит скрытый характер и находится вне фокуса общественного внимания.
Most conflicts tend to be secretive and take place outside the public's eye. The conflicts we do see in the media are just the tip of the iceberg. Another trend is that company management suppresses disputes that spring up later in time. We witnessed that in cases with ArcelorMittal Temirtau, Kazakhmys, etc.
Тот факт, что зачастую решения руководств крупных предприятий решают ту или иную проблему на определенное время.
The procedure of resolving collective labor argument is unreasonably complicated. That is why workers' legal actions turn quickly into rallies and all the lawsuits are won by the employer. Workers' demands are approved at the general meeting. The meeting has to be attended by no less than half of the total amount of employees and 2/3 of delegates elected to read out the demands. Workers' demands are expressed in written form and are sent to the employer within 3 days. The employer is given another 3 days to review these demands. If the employer turns down or only partially complies with the demands, a conciliatory committee is created in 3 days. The law gives another 3 days for the committee to conduct its work. Afterwards, the committee protocol is sent to the employer. If problems aren't solved in 5 days period, labor arbitration is created among the representatives of the employer and the employees. It convenes for 7 days, then decides by majority vote if workers' demands are to be addressed or not. The labor arbitration's decision is mandatory. If, after having gone through all these steps, workers do not cool off, the labor legislation gives them the right to strike. The decision is made at the workers' general meeting by a majority vote. The employer must be informed in written form no later than 5 days prior to its commencement. Any deviations from these procedures may prompt the court to declare the strike unlawful and stop it, distributing administrative and disciplinary punishment to its active participants. Trade unions are class warfare. One can say it is a battle between labor and capital. Yes, there is a legal framework, but it is a conflict. Zhanartu trade union attorney Yuri Vinkov has 20 years of experience in the trade union movement under his belt. Currently, he, along with other like-minded people, is unsuccessfully trying to register his trade union. Yuri says that, unfortunately, the trade union system has deteriorated in the years of independence. Everything about this simply irritates me. In Soviet times, trade unions were looked at as the graveyard of the party apparatus. Those who couldn't make it in the party were sent there. They were often moved on moral grounds such as alcohol addiction. Having gotten there and having seen the entire splendor sanatoriums, health resorts, complete freedom of action, they simply became undisciplined. According to the Labor Ministry, the state owes its workers slightly over $12.5 million. The poll numbers in the quarterly report of the Political Decisions Institute suggest the biggest risk to political stability is posed by protest activity and labor strikes. Official suggestions by the Labor Ministry are based on Europe's experience. The role of social mediators are to be taken by professional unions. Experts agree on one thing: something needs to be done. The question is, what exactly, as the regular cures are no longer effective.
Last week, President Nazarbayev, who rules Kazakhstan since the 90s of the past century, said that the humanity has exhausted its limit for revolutions in the last century. At the Economic Forum in Astana, surrounded by 12 Nobel laureates and 4 members of the top 100 global thinkers, among others, the head of state voiced the fundamental principles of the world order in the 21st century.
There are no anti-globalists with posters near the Palace of Independence. No one is protesting, as no troublemakers would make it past the cordon. A special pass is required to attend the 5th Economic Forum in Astana. Officially, 8,000 applicants from 90 countries worldwide have been sent by politicians and businessmen. At the same time, entrance computers counted less than 5,000 visitors in the 3 days of the event, though in the scale of the palace, it's just hard to tell the difference. It is 30 minutes to the opening ceremony, but the main hall is almost full. There are only a few empty VIP seats next to the tribune. They will be taken by Nursultan Nazarbayev and his most honored guests. In anticipation of the host, people seem to occupy themselves as best as they can. Some already engage in business negotiations, others are intensively studying the program. Finally, the president of Kazakhstan walks in the hall through the side door. He seems a little concerned. Apparently, he wants everything to go perfectly. He even personally tells the cameraman to get off his way. Nursultan Nazarbayev's speech was long and thorough. The nation's leader is confident the second wave of the economic crisis will not affect his country. Kazakhstan has accumulated $86 billion for the rainy days as revenues from oil and gas resources. However, the Kazakh leader is not sure about the rest of the world. The euro seems to be failing, and the rate of unemployment is rising in the eurozone, while people survive there on $2 a day. Therefore, such unstable countries need to unite with a prosperous Kazakhstan. The president had confidently offered the fundamental principles of a new world order. I believe that mankind has already used up the limits of revolutions and world wars in the last century. Today, the sole wisdom of humanity is to save our world as opposed to the self-destruction. Revolutions in the 21st century are possible and acceptable only in the field of science and technology, but they are disastrous in political terms and social life. The president approves technological breakthroughs, yet the revolutions on the web are still suppressed with no explanation. Meanwhile, one floor above, Anton Nosik, the owner and one of the developers of the live journal platforms, is talking to bloggers. A prominent Runet persona, Nosik is openly skeptical. To ban a platform for communication, to ban people from reading, these methods are of totalitarian dictatorships and obscurantist theocracies. This censorship is not intended against the bloggers and their posts. They banned a few millions of reading material from their own citizens. The meeting of bloggers was one of the many activities held as part of the Astana event, proudly hailed as the Kazakh World Economic Forum. Hundreds of speakers, dozens of conferences and conventions. Main topic: the global economic transformation. The keynote is a new wave of the crisis and ways to resist it. The G8 and G20 were actually meant for the selected few when the world polysystemic crisis requires a massive participation of majority of the world's countries. There are 4 official languages at the forum: Kazakh, Russian, English and Turkish, but only a few interpreters perfectly speak all 4. Therefore, they have to take turns, which led to pauses, delays and eventually to out-of-breath voices. The most serious incident occurred during a speech of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish Prime Minister. The senior official had to spend a minute waiting for the interpreter to show up. There are 120 students among the staff, mostly freshmen, working since 6 a.m. They have to wash loads of dishes after a morning coffee break and prepare everything for dinner in a timely manner. There is no time for a break or even a quick snack. In fact, the organizers of the event do not allow anyone to communicate with students. Spotting a nearby camera is akin to emergency.
В рабочей зоне не находитесь вообще. Выйдите отсюда. Мы вам не разрешаем вон туда. Разрешения на эту съемку нету. В гостевой зал выходите, там снимать. Ну, спрашивают разрешение сначала, прежде чем снимают.
The total menu for the average forum participant is $137 a day, and it's a lot more expensive for VIP guests. The figures may vary in the cost of the air travel, hourly rented Mercedes, and their accommodation at the best Astana hotels. Originally, the organizers planned to spending $3,150,000, yet there apparently the possibility of additional expenses. I say all expenses shall be transparently itemized, this much for the room rent, that much for transportation costs, and so much for accommodation, because these are the taxpayers' money. That's unfortunately not in place. And I think this question should be directly addressed to those who organize this event. Another expense item is payment of royalties to Nobel Prize winners. This year, 11 of them arrived in Astana. Each one was paid $30,000 and $810 worth of gifts. However, the responsibilities assigned to scientific geniuses by Kazakh authorities were very nominal. Looks like their presence alone is enough to add more weight to the event. Occasionally, they shared general thoughts on the global economy. But during discussions, the Nobel laureate tried to stay awake, and even the legendary John Nash, whose wife was the subject of the film A Beautiful Mind, seemed to be there only for show, and for this reason, no curious spectators were allowed near him. We have a certain media for media. We can meet and have a decent discussion later. At the moment, we are late to the lunch with the president. Ma'am, not now. We'll be here tomorrow. Nevertheless, Nash's colleague, the University of Arizona professor Edward Prescott, managed to make one resident statement proposing to transfer oil revenues to deposits of every citizen of Kazakhstan. The generous offer at someone else's expense was clearly not appreciated by local officials. The finance minister Bolat Zhameshev believes the free distribution of oil revenues will only multiply the number of loafers. It is better to invest money in building schools and hospitals. Sweet and easy loans are nothing but a trap. We need to stop living in debt and using the loans, and that's what we're trying to do.
Заключение выпуска, материал еще об одном форуме.
In conclusion, a story about Freedom Forum, which took place in the capital of Norway. Civil society activists from around the globe used the opportunity to talk about the authoritarian political regimes skillfully hidden behind a democratic facade, raised with the help of Western lobbyists.
При умелой поддержке западных лоббистов.
The Freedom Forum was often called the Davos of human rights. It is still relatively young. In the beginning, there were just a few dozen real enthusiasts. Now, only the opening press conference gathers several hundred journalists. The founder of the Freedom Forum, journalist Thor Halvorsen, is a well-known defender of human rights. He was able to attract funding and support for his initiatives from a number of private organizations, as well as ethics-practicing businessmen. Political views among participants of the forum can vary greatly. They are united by one thing only, the belief that political stances can be fairly and consistently defended only when human rights are observed. One of the central questions of the forum was the issue of mimicry of modern pseudo-democratic dictatorships, sometimes created with the support of Western advisors, retired politicians, and private corporations. Kazakhstan, according to the organizers of the forum, is a classic example of such a state. Who and how is helping Kazakhstan's authorities to build a facade, and how are these efforts turning out? Respublika newspaper's presentation focused on these questions and featured episodes ranging from Kazakh Gate and Superkhan to the use of former British politicians as promoters of president's administration. Singapore became the main example of a democratic facade for Kazakhstan, as was revealed through Respublika's publications. The forum was to be attended by a prominent Singaporean human rights activist, Chisun Huan, but at the last moment, he was simply not allowed to leave the country, and an economic criminal case was filed against him. Only his video address was broadcast at the forum, where he described how a democratic facade is designed in Singapore.
Kazakhstan is one of the most important countries for us to focus on. I think if you look at the countries that we've focused on, most of them are closed societies, where inside those countries there isn't a vibrant civil society. In Norway, in the United States, we have problems, but we have a vibrant civil society to address them. We have checks and balances in our political system. We have a democracy. We have free speech. These things might be curtailed in some ways, but generally, it's a healthy system in most Western democracies.
You were watching Vlast KZ on K+, key trends, highlights, and personalities of the past week. Goodbye.
Всего вам доброго и до новых встреч.